A radiant smile graced Isabella Carter's face as she gently placed a diamond necklace, a family heirloom, into a velvet box. The billionaire's daughter, known for her glamorous lifestyle, had stunned the world by donating her entire jewelry collection to a small orphanage in the heart of her city. But Isabella didn't expect what came next. When the children presented her with their heartfelt gesture of gratitude, tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving everyone speechless. What could these children, who had so little, possibly give her in return that could evoke such raw emotion? Stay tuned as we unravel this heartwarming story. Isabella Carter had grown up in the glittering world of wealth and privilege. Her father, Henry Carter, was a self-made billionaire who had built his empire from the ground up, owning luxury resorts and real estate developments around the globe. Isabella, their only daughter, was often photographed at lavish galas, donning designer gowns and priceless jewelry. The tabloids painted her as the quintessential rich girl, seemingly far removed from the struggles of ordinary people. But there was more to Isabella than met the eye. While the public saw a glamorous young woman, those close to her knew she had a deeply compassionate side. Her mother, Elizabeth Carter, had instilled in her a sense of responsibility to use her privilege for good. Elizabeth often volunteered at charities and encouraged Isabella to join her, even as a child. Though Isabella's teenage years were spent in the limelight, she never forgot the lessons her mother had taught her. Now 28, Isabella found herself at a crossroads. After her mother's sudden passing the previous year, she had begun to question the meaning of her lavish lifestyle. She spent sleepless nights scrolling through photos of her mother's charitable work, wondering how she could honor her legacy. Her father, consumed by his business, rarely spoke about the loss, leaving Isabella to grapple with her grief alone. One crisp autumn morning, while scrolling through social media, Isabella came across a video of an orphanage struggling to provide basic necessities for its children. The images of underfed kids, wearing tattered clothes, tugged at her heartstrings. The orphanage, Bright Horizons, was located just 30 kilometers from the city's wealthiest district, a stark contrast to the life Isabella had always known. The director of the orphanage, Mrs. Eleanor Shaw, was a kind but overwhelmed woman in her 60s. She had dedicated her life to the children, but the lack of funding meant they often relied on donations to make ends meet. Food shortages, leaky roofs, and outdated facilities were the daily challenges they faced. Isabella couldn't shake the images of those children. That evening, as she sat in her luxurious walk-in closet, surrounded by rows of sparkling jewelry, something clicked. Each necklace, bracelet and ring seemed to lose its luster as she thought of the empty plates and cold beds those children endured every day. "This isn't wealth," she whispered to herself. "What's the point of all this if I can't use it to make a difference?" The next morning, Isabella made a bold decision. She carefully packed her jewelry into a set of velvet-lined cases, each piece worth thousands, if not millions. Her father, though skeptical at first, eventually supported her decision, albeit with a raised eyebrow. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "This is a lot to give away." "I'm sure, Dad," Isabella replied. "It's time to do something that matters." As she drove toward Bright Horizons in her sleek car, the cityscape gradually gave way to narrow streets lined with modest homes. The orphanage itself was a small, weathered building with peeling paint and a rusting gate. Children played in the yard, their laughter echoing despite the visible signs of poverty. Isabella's heart ached as she stepped out of her car, clutching the cases of jewelry. She was greeted warmly by Mrs. Shaw, who looked surprised but grateful. "We weren't expecting you, Miss Carter," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. Isabella smiled. "Please, call me Isabella, and I came here to help." The children, curious about the elegant woman in their yard, gathered around her. Isabella knelt down, meeting their eyes. She was struck by their smiles, so pure and full of hope, despite their circumstances. Little did she know, this visit would change not only their lives, but hers as well. Isabella's arrival at the orphanage brought a flurry of excitement. The children gathered around her, their eyes wide with curiosity, while Mrs. Shaw watched from a distance, her expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. The cases of jewelry sparkled in the sunlight as Isabella carried them inside the modest building. "This is for the children," Isabella said softly, placing the cases on Mrs. Shaw's desk. "Sell it, auction it, do whatever you need to improve the orphanage. I only ask that it be used to give these kids a better life." Mrs. Shaw's hands trembled as she opened one of the cases, revealing an array of diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. She gasped, her eyes welling up with tears. "Isabella, I don't know what to say. This is more than we could have ever dreamed of." The children peeked into the room, their giggles and whispers breaking the momentary silence. One little girl, Amelia, with curly hair and a mischievous grin, boldly stepped forward. "Are you a princess?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. Isabella laughed, kneeling to Amelia's level. "No, sweetheart, I'm not a princess, but I think every one of you is more special than any princess I've ever met." The connection was immediate. Isabella spent the afternoon with the children, helping them with their art projects, reading stories, and even joining a game of tag. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose. Yet, as the day wore on, she couldn't ignore the signs of the orphanage's struggles, the creaking floors, the thin blankets on the beds, and the worn-out books in the library. Despite the children's smiles, Isabella noticed the shadow of sadness in their eyes. Many of them were orphans due to tragic circumstances, and their stories tugged at her heart. She listened as they shared bits and pieces of their lives, each tale more heart-wrenching than the last. Amelia, for example, had lost her parents in a car accident and clung to a tattered stuffed bear as her only reminder of home. But not everyone welcomed Isabella with open arms. Among the staff was a young assistant named Claire, who had grown up in the orphanage and now worked tirelessly to support it. Claire was skeptical of Isabella's intentions, her demeanor cold and distant. "You think a few diamonds will fix everything?" Claire muttered when Isabella approached her during a break. "These kids need more than money. They need someone who's here for them, who understands what they've been through." Isabella was taken aback, but nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, Claire. Money can't solve everything. But it's a start, isn't it? I just want to help." Claire shrugged, her gaze distant. "We'll see." Isabella's next challenge came when she offered to organize an auction for the jewelry. She knew that selling the collection piece by piece would yield the best results, but the process was far from simple. She enlisted the help of her father's connections, reaching out to auction houses and collectors. However, not everyone was eager to work with her. Some dismissed her efforts as a publicity stunt, while others questioned her commitment. "You're just another rich girl trying to make herself feel better," one critic sneered during a phone call. "Why don't you just write a check and be done with it?" The words stung, but Isabella refused to back down. She poured her energy into planning the auction, spending long nights researching, coordinating with appraisers, and ensuring that every piece of jewelry would fetch its highest value. At the same time, she continued visiting the orphanage, deepening her bond with the children and earning the trust of the staff, Claire included. One day, as Isabella sat with Amelia, helping her draw a picture of a castle, the little girl looked up and asked, "Why are you helping us?" The question caught Isabella off guard. She thought for a moment before replying, "Because I want to. Because I see how special you all are, and I want to make sure you have everything you need to be happy." Amelia smiled, her eyes shining. "You're like a fairy godmother." Isabella laughed, but the words stayed with her. For the first time, she felt the weight of responsibility, not as a burden, but as a privilege. As the auction approached, Isabella faced another hurdle. A potential buyer, Mr. Langston, tried to undercut her by offering a fraction of the jewelry's value, hoping to exploit her inexperience. "These pieces are worth far more than that," Isabella said firmly, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I won't settle for less." Mr. Langston smirked. "You don't have the experience to handle this. Why not let me take care of it? You'll still get a decent sum." Isabella's determination only grew. She declined his offer and instead sought advice from a trusted friend of her mother's, Mrs. Caldwell, a seasoned philanthropist. With Mrs. Caldwell's guidance, Isabella navigated the complexities of the auction world, ensuring that every piece of jewelry would be sold at its true value. On the day of the auction, the room was filled with bidders, each eager to claim a piece of Isabella's collection. The atmosphere was electric as the auctioneer began, his gavel punctuating each sale with a resounding thud. Isabella watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and anxiety. As the final piece, a diamond necklace her mother had gifted her on her 18th birthday, was sold for an astounding sum, Isabella felt a surge of relief. The total amount raised exceeded expectations, enough to not only renovate the orphanage but also provide scholarships for the children. When Isabella returned to Bright Horizons with the news, the children erupted in cheers. Mrs. Shaw hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Even Claire offered a rare smile, her skepticism replaced by admiration. But the most touching moment came when Amelia ran up to Isabella, clutching a small, hand-drawn card. "This is for you," she said shyly. Isabella opened the card to find a picture of herself surrounded by the children, with the words, "Our fairy godmother," scrawled in bright crayon. Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged Amelia tightly. "I'm not a fairy godmother," Isabella said softly, "but I promise to always be here for you." As the weeks went by, Isabella continued to visit the orphanage, helping with renovations and spending time with the children. She grew close to Claire, who eventually opened up about her own struggles and dreams. Together, they worked to create a brighter future for Bright Horizons, turning it into a beacon of hope for the community. Little did Isabella know, the children had been planning something special for her. On the day of the grand reopening, they surprised her with a handmade quilt, each square decorated with their drawings and messages of gratitude. As Isabella unfolded the quilt, she was overcome with emotion. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you, all of you." In that moment, Isabella realized that the true value of her actions wasn't in the money she had raised or the jewelry she had donated. It was in the connections she had made, the lives she had touched, and the love she had received in return. The experience transformed Isabella, solidifying her commitment to philanthropy. She went on to establish a foundation in her mother's name, dedicating her life to helping those in need. But no matter how many lives she touched, Bright Horizons would always hold a special place in her heart. A reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples of change. As the grand auction approached, the tension surrounding Isabella's mission reached its peak. The stakes had never been higher. Her success would mean a new beginning for the children of Bright Horizons, but failure would confirm the doubts of her critics and potentially devastate the orphanage's future. The night before the auction, Isabella sat in her room, reviewing every detail. She had meticulously planned for weeks, working tirelessly to ensure that each piece of jewelry would fetch the highest possible price. Her father, initially skeptical of her efforts, had finally expressed his support, providing her with key connections to influential buyers. But despite her progress, Isabella couldn't shake the nagging fear that something could go wrong. The morning of the auction, the opulent ballroom of a five-star hotel buzzed with activity. The glittering chandeliers, rows of polished chairs, and a stage adorned with velvet curtains created an atmosphere of grandeur. Wealthy bidders, collectors, and philanthropists filled the room, their conversations mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. Reporters hovered near the edges, eager to capture the event's outcome. Isabella arrived early, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown. She carried herself with quiet confidence, but inside, her nerves were frayed. Mrs. Caldwell, her mentor, stood by her side, offering reassuring words. "You've done everything you can, Isabella," Mrs. Caldwell said. "Now it's time to let your work speak for itself." As the auctioneer stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. The first item, a delicate sapphire bracelet, was presented, and the bidding began. Isabella watched anxiously as the prices climbed higher with each call, her heart pounding every time the gavel struck to confirm a sale. But halfway through the auction, an unexpected twist threatened to derail everything. Mr. Langston, the same buyer who had attempted to undercut Isabella, stood and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth but cutting, "while I commend Miss Isabella for her efforts, I must question the authenticity of this collection. How can we be certain these pieces are worth the prices being offered?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Isabella's stomach dropped. This was exactly the kind of sabotage she had feared. Mr. Langston's words cast doubt not only on the jewelry, but on her character as well. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she quickly forced herself to remain calm. Before the auctioneer could respond, Isabella stepped forward. Her voice, steady despite the tremor in her chest, cut through the chatter. "Mr. Langston," she said, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve, "every piece in this collection has been appraised by certified experts. The documentation is available for anyone who wishes to review it. If you'd like, I can personally provide you with the credentials of the appraisers." The room fell silent as Isabella continued. "This isn't just about jewelry, it's about giving these children a chance at a better life. I won't allow baseless accusations to undermine their future." Her words carried a weight that silenced even Mr. Langston. He sat down, his expression sour, while a ripple of applause spread through the audience. The auction resumed, but Isabella could feel the lingering tension in the air. As the final item was presented, a diamond necklace that once belonged to her mother, the atmosphere shifted again. This piece held the most sentimental value for Isabella, and parting with it had been a difficult decision. She had debated whether to keep it, but ultimately she knew its sale could make a significant difference for the orphanage. The bidding for the necklace was fierce, with multiple buyers vying for the prized piece. The price climbed higher and higher, exceeding all expectations. Isabella's heart raced as the auctioneer called for final bids. "Going once? Going twice? Sold!" The gavel struck, and the room erupted in applause. The necklace had sold for an astounding amount, securing the funds needed to transform Bright Horizons. But just as Isabella breathed a sigh of relief, another twist emerged. After the auction, as guests mingled and congratulated her, a man approached her with a grim expression. He introduced himself as Mr. Avery, a representative of the auction house. "Miss Isabella," he began, "there's been a problem. One of the buyers has filed a formal complaint, claiming the bidding process was unfair." The words hit Isabella like a punch to the gut. "What? Who would do that?" "It was Mr. Langston," Mr. Avery replied. "He's claiming the bids for the necklace were inflated artificially." Anger and frustration surged within her. But Isabella forced herself to remain composed. She couldn't let this setback overshadow everything she had accomplished. Drawing on the resilience she had developed over the past weeks, she looked Mr. Avery in the eye. "I want to address this immediately," she said. "Let's review the bidding process together and resolve this." What followed was a tense meeting with Mr. Langston, Mr. Avery, and representatives from the auction house. Isabella presented the documentation, reviewed the bidding records, and defended her integrity with poise and determination. Her calm yet assertive demeanor left no room for doubt, and eventually Mr. Langston withdrew his complaint. By the time the ordeal was over, Isabella felt drained but victorious. She returned to the orphanage that evening, where the children and staff greeted her with cheers and hugs. The funds raised from the auction were more than enough to renovate the building, provide new supplies, and create educational programs for the children. But the night wasn't over yet. As Isabella sat with the children, listening to their laughter and stories, Amelia approached her with a small box in her hands. "This is for you," Amelia said, her eyes shining with excitement. Isabella opened the box to find a handmade bracelet strung together with colorful beads and charms. Each charm represented something meaningful: a heart for love, a star for hope, a tree for growth. Tears filled Isabella's eyes as she realized the children had made it for her as a token of their gratitude. "It's beautiful," she whispered, hugging Amelia tightly. "Thank you." In that moment, Isabella understood that the true value of her efforts wasn't in the money she had raised or the jewelry she had donated. It was in the connections she had made, the lives she had touched, and the love she had received in return. The experience had transformed her, deepening her commitment to helping others. As she looked around the room at the children's smiling faces, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. The challenges she had faced, the doubts she had overcome, and the sacrifices she had made had all led to this moment, a moment of pure, unbridled joy. And so, what began as a simple act of generosity had become a journey of redemption, growth, and love. A journey that would continue to shape Isabella's life and the lives of those she touched for years to come. The transformation sparked by Isabella's auction wasn't just confined to the walls of Bright Horizons. It rippled far beyond, impacting everyone involved in ways they couldn't have imagined. Over the weeks and months that followed, the results of her efforts became increasingly visible, turning a once-forgotten orphanage into a vibrant, thriving community. For Isabella, the auction was a turning point. Though she had initially embarked on this journey as an act of rebellion against her father's wealth and detachment, it became something far more profound. It revealed to her the depth of her own empathy and the power of selflessness. Isabella didn't stop with just the auction. Inspired by the experience, she founded a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting orphanages and underprivileged children. She poured her heart into her work, leveraging her family's wealth and connections to secure sponsorships, donations, and partnerships. Her organization, named New Horizons Foundation, quickly gained recognition for its innovative programs and direct impact on children's lives. Her father, initially skeptical of her philanthropic endeavors, grew to admire her determination. Watching Isabella dedicate herself so fully to her cause reminded him of the values he had once held as a young man before he became consumed by business and wealth. Gradually, their strained relationship began to mend. Her father started attending her events, offering not just financial support, but also his presence and encouragement. Their reconciliation was one of the many ways the auction had changed Isabella's life. Her father's newfound respect for her work gave her the confidence to pursue her vision without hesitation. She became a role model for others in her social circle, proving that wealth could be a tool for good rather than a source of detachment. Bright Horizons itself underwent a complete transformation. The funds raised from the auction were used to renovate the crumbling building, turning it into a bright, welcoming space filled with color, warmth, and laughter. The orphanage's once leaky roof was replaced, the classrooms were equipped with new desks and supplies, and the dormitories became cozy and comfortable for the children. But the impact wasn't just physical. The money also funded new programs that focused on education, mental health, and extracurricular activities. For the first time, the children at Bright Horizons had access to art classes, sports programs, and counseling services. They began to flourish in ways that had seemed impossible before. Amelia, the shy little girl who had gifted Isabella the bracelet, found her voice through painting. Her artwork became a source of pride for the orphanage, with one of her pieces even being featured in a local gallery. Her newfound confidence inspired other children to pursue their own interests, creating a ripple effect of self-expression and creativity. The orphanage also became a hub for community involvement. Local volunteers, inspired by Isabella's story, began to contribute their time and skills. Some offered tutoring sessions, others taught music or dance, and many simply came to spend time with the children, showing them that they were loved and valued. The auction and its aftermath captured the attention of the media, turning Isabella into a local hero. Her story inspired countless others to take action in their own communities. Donations poured in, not just for Bright Horizons, but for orphanages and shelters across the country. People who had once been indifferent to social issues found themselves moved by the story of a billionaire's daughter who had chosen to give everything for those in need. One particularly touching outcome was the story of Mrs. Caldwell, the director of Bright Horizons. After years of struggling to keep the orphanage afloat, she finally felt the burden lifting. With the financial support secured, she was able to focus on the children's well-being, rather than worrying about unpaid bills or overdue repairs. Her tireless dedication was finally recognized, and she received an award for her contributions to the community. Mrs. Caldwell often said that Isabella had done more than just save the orphanage. She had given her hope. "It's not just about the money," she told reporters. "It's about showing these children that there are people who care about them, people who believe in their potential." Isabella reminded all of us that we're not alone. The story of Isabella's journey resonated deeply because it carried universal themes of compassion, redemption, and the power of choice. At its core, it was a reminder that small acts of kindness could lead to monumental change. Isabella's decision to donate her jewelry wasn't just about the money, it was about the message it sent. Her actions challenged the notion that wealth defined a person's worth. Instead, she showed that true value came from what one gave to others. The orphanage became a symbol of that belief, a place where children who had been abandoned or overlooked were given the love and opportunities they deserved. The story also highlighted the importance of looking beyond appearances. Many of the bidders at the auction had seen Isabella as nothing more than a spoiled billionaire's daughter, yet she proved them wrong with her humility and determination. Similarly, the children at Bright Horizons, often dismissed by society as orphans, were revealed to be talented, bright, and full of potential when given the chance to thrive. For the audience, the takeaway was clear. Everyone has the power to make a difference, no matter their circumstances. Whether it's through a donation, volunteering, or simply showing kindness to someone in need, each act contributes to a larger movement of positive change. Years later, Isabella returned to Bright Horizons for its anniversary celebration. The once dilapidated building was now a beacon of hope, bustling with activity and joy. She was greeted by children and staff alike, all eager to show her the impact of her work. Amelia, now a teenager, presented Isabella with a new painting, a vibrant depiction of the orphanage surrounded by smiling children. It was titled A New Horizon. Isabella couldn't hold back her tears as she hugged Amelia, overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment. As the celebration continued, Isabella reflected on how far they had all come. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were moments when she had doubted herself. But standing there, surrounded by the laughter and love of the children she had fought for, she knew it had all been worth it. The event ended with a speech from Mrs. Caldwell, who spoke of the orphanage's transformation and the power of one person's courage to inspire change. Isabella taught us that it's not about what you have, she said, her voice filled with emotion. It's about what you do with what you have. And she showed us that when we come together, we can create something extraordinary. The story of Isabella and Bright Horizons became a lasting legacy, inspiring countless others to follow in her footsteps. And as Isabella left the celebration, her heart full, she carried with her the profound knowledge that even the smallest act of kindness could create ripples of hope that would last a lifetime.